The moment I heard the muffled laughter through the heavy oak door, something in my chest cracked. I wasn't supposed to be here. Not at this party, not at this moment, standing outside with my hand frozen midair, deciding whether to knock or walk away. But something had driven me here, something stronger than logic or pride. Maybe it was the little voice that had been whispering in the back of my head for months, telling me I didn't really know her anymore. Stephanie and I weren't the kind of couple that kept secrets. Or at least, that's what I believed for the past 7 years. She was my best friend, my partner, the person I built my life with. But lately, there had been cracks in that image, little things I couldn't explain. At first, it was easy to ignore. She'd gotten a big promotion 6 months ago, and with it came long hours, late nights, and networking events. I told myself it was all part of her new role, that I should be proud of her. And I was. But then the changes started, small at first, like how she was always on her phone, laughing at texts she wouldn't explain, or how she started locking her phone when she never used to. I told myself not to be paranoid. I wasn't one of those guys, the jealous, controlling types. But it wasn't just the phone. She started pulling away, emotionally and physically. The way she used to light up when I walked into the room? Gone. The silly little traditions we used to share, Friday movie nights, lazy Sunday breakfasts, replaced with vague excuses and hurried conversations. 2 weeks ago, I caught her in a lie. She said she was sick and canceled our date night. I offered to stay home with her, but she insisted I go without her. Something about the way she said it gnawed at me, so I decided to surprise her with some soup at her office. Her car wasn't there. Neither was she. When I texted her to check in, she replied immediately, just resting on the couch. Thanks for understanding. I stared at my phone for what felt like an eternity, my heart pounding in my ears. That lie changed everything. The door opened just enough for Mark to peek out. His grin froze when he saw me, quickly replaced by something I couldn't quite place. Guilt, maybe. Hey, what are you doing here? He asked, leaning heavily against the frame as if he could block me from seeing inside. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. I pushed past him, ignoring his half-hearted attempt to stop me, and stepped into the apartment. The room hit me like a slap to the face. It wasn't some casual work gathering, like Stephanie had claimed. The lights were dim, the music loud, and the place was packed with people holding expensive cocktails. A wave of laughter rippled from the bar area, and that's when I saw her. Stephanie. She was standing under one of those cheap hanging lights, but somehow, she looked like she belonged in a magazine. Her dress shimmered with every movement, the neckline lower than anything I'd seen her wear in years. She was holding a drink and leaning toward a guy I didn't recognize. Her lips curved into a laugh that made my stomach turn. It wasn't just the dress or the laugh or even the guy. It was her entire presence, this carefree, radiant version of her I hadn't seen in so long. And the worst part? She didn't even notice me. Steph, I said, loud enough to cut through the music. Her laugh stopped. Her head snapped around, and the smile vanished from her face. What are you doing here? She asked, her voice sharp, her eyes narrowing. I stepped closer, ignoring the curious looks from the people around us. Funny, I said, my tone colder than I expected. I could ask you the same thing. Her gaze flicked to the guy beside her, who suddenly found his drink very interesting. Mark had followed me in and was now hovering by the door, looking like he wanted to bolt. This is a work event, Stephanie said, her words clipped. Work event, I repeated, gesturing around the room. Really? This looks more like a party. And last I checked, your work events didn't include him. I jerked my chin toward the guy she'd been talking to. She sighed like I was a kid throwing a tantrum in public. You're making a scene. That's when I saw it, her phone, sitting face up on the bar. A message lit up the screen. Can't wait to see you tonight, winking face. It wasn't from me. Who's it from, Stephanie? I asked, my voice steady but loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. Her face flushed, and she snatched the phone off the bar, locking the screen before shoving it into her purse. Don't do this here, she hissed. I stepped closer, the anger bubbling up faster than I could control. Do what? Catch you lying? Find out you've been sneaking around behind my back. The guy beside her took a cautious step away, clearly not ready to get involved. Mark shifted uncomfortably near the door, but didn't say a word. You don't know what you're talking about, Stephanie snapped, her voice rising. I leaned in, dropping my voice so only she could hear. Then tell me I'm wrong. Tell me you weren't planning on meeting someone here tonight. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Instead, she crossed her arms and gave me that icy stare that had become all too familiar lately. You're embarrassing yourself, she said finally. That's when it hit me. The late nights, the guarded phone, the sudden distance. This wasn't paranoia. It was real. And I wasn't going to let her brush me off. I don't know what I expected her to say. An apology, an excuse, maybe even a confession. But all I got was a shrug and a dismissive roll of her eyes. You're acting crazy, she said, like I was the one who had done something wrong. Crazy, I repeated, my voice sharper than I intended. Stephanie, I've spent months wondering why you've been lying to me. Months. And now, here I am, watching you cozy up to some random guy at a party you didn't even bother to mention. She sighed, exasperated, and picked up her drink like this was just another inconvenience in her night. You're overthinking everything. It's just a party, for God's sake. I needed a break. Do you have any idea how stressful my life has been? Her words felt like a slap. I had spent the last 7 years bending over backward to support her. Her career, her dreams, her endless ambitions. And now I was supposed to believe this was about stress relief? I clenched my fists at my sides, trying to hold back the wave of anger building inside me. Then explain the text, I said, nodding toward her purse. Explain why some guy is sending you winking emojis, saying he can't wait to see you. She froze for half a second, just long enough for me to notice, but quickly recovered. It's not what you think, she said, her tone flat. Then tell me what it is. Instead of answering, she set her drink down with a loud clink and turned to face me fully, her arms crossed. You're being ridiculous, she said. You've always been so insecure. I can't even have a conversation with someone without you jumping to conclusions. It wasn't just the words. It was the way she said them, cold, detached, as if this wasn't worth her time. That was the moment something inside me snapped. Insecure? I said, my voice rising. You've been lying to me for months, sneaking around, making excuses, locking your phone. And now I find you here, acting like you're single, and you have a nerve to call me insecure. By now, the room had gone quiet. People were staring, Mark, the guy she'd been talking to, even strangers who didn't know either of us. But I didn't care. Let them watch. Let them see this for what it was. She smirked, a cruel little smile that sent a chill down my spine. You know what? I'll do whatever I want, with whoever I want, she said, her voice dripping with venom. You don't own me. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, all I could hear was the pounding of my own heartbeat. Got it, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I turned to leave, but not before looking over at Mark. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, but I didn't give him the chance. I walked out the door, my fists clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew one thing. She wasn't getting away with this. I barely remember the drive home. My thoughts were a chaotic mess of anger, betrayal, and a gnawing need for answers. Every word she said replayed in my head, each one hitting harder than the last. I'll do whatever I want, with whoever I want. That wasn't just a defense. It was an admission. When I got home, the house felt colder, emptier than it ever had before. Her scent lingered in the air, the faint trace of her perfume mocking me. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I needed to do something, anything to make sense of it all. I started with the drawer in our bedroom, the one where she kept her mail and random papers. It felt wrong, digging through her things, but at this point I didn't care. That's when I found it. An envelope. It was tucked under a stack of old bills, almost as if she'd tried to hide it. My name wasn't on it, but hers was written in a messy scrawl I didn't recognize. The postmark was from a few weeks ago. I hesitated for a moment, my hands trembling, before tearing it open. Inside was a single piece of paper, a receipt from a luxury hotel downtown. It was dated the same night she had told me she was working late. 2 names were on it, hers and Mark's. I stared at the paper for what felt like an eternity, my chest tightening with every passing second. The room spun around me as the pieces of the puzzle finally clicked into place. This wasn't just a mistake. This wasn't just her needing space. She had betrayed me, and she hadn't even bothered to hide it well. My hand shook as I folded the receipt and slid it back into the envelope. For a moment, I felt completely numb, but then something else took over, something sharper, colder. If she thought she could get away with this, she was wrong. I didn't wait for her to come home that night. I couldn't. The anger coursing through me wouldn't let me sit still, wouldn't let me wait. I grabbed the envelope, got back into my car, and drove straight to Mark's apartment. The party was still going when I got there, music spilling out onto the street as people laughed and mingled on the balcony. My heart was pounding as I climbed the stairs, the envelope clutched in my hand. I wasn't sure what I was going to say, but I knew I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. Mark opened the door when I knocked, his face falling the second he saw me. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His silence told me everything I needed to know. "Where is she?" I demanded, my voice low but firm. He stepped aside without a fight, and there she was, sitting on the couch with a glass of wine in her hand, laughing with a few people I didn't recognize. When her eyes met mine, her smile vanished, replaced by something that almost looked like fear. I held up the envelope as I stepped into the room. "Explain this," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. She glanced at it, her face going pale for a split second before she composed herself. "You went through my stuff?" she asked, her tone accusatory like I was the one in the wrong. "Don't," I snapped. "Don't you dare turn this on me. I want the truth, Stephanie. What's been going on between you and Mark?" The room went silent. Mark shifted uncomfortably behind me, but I didn't look at him. My eyes stayed locked on hers, waiting for an answer. She set her glass down and stood up, her arms crossed. "Fine," she said, her voice cold and sharp. "You want the truth? Here it is. I'm tired of being with someone who doesn't understand me. Mark does. He listens to me. He's there for me. He's everything you're not." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. But then, the anger surged back, stronger than ever. "So, this is my fault?" I asked, my voice shaking with rage. "You've been sneaking around behind my back, and I'm the problem?" She didn't answer. Instead, she crossed her arms tighter and looked away, as if she couldn't even be bothered to argue. I turned to Mark, who was still hovering by the door. "And you," I said, my voice icy. "You were supposed to be my best friend." He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He looked like a kid caught stealing from the cookie jar, too ashamed to face me. I shook my head, disgusted. "You're both pathetic," I said, my voice low but cutting. "And you deserve each other." I turned and walked out before either of them could respond. My chest felt tight, my vision blurred, but I didn't stop. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. The drive home felt surreal, like I was floating outside my own body. The anger, the betrayal, it was all there, but now it felt muted, like I'd been drained of everything. The house was dark when I got back, empty and hollow, just like me. I dropped the envelope on the kitchen counter and stared at it for a long time. My mind raced with everything she'd said. "Mark understands me. He's everything you're not." Her words played on a loop, slicing deeper every time. How do we even get here? 7 years of marriage, countless memories, and it all came crashing down in one night. I thought about every moment we'd shared. The good times, the fights, the plans for a future I now realized was a lie. How long had she been slipping away from me? And how could I have been so blind? I didn't sleep that night. I paced the living room, alternating between anger and despair, until the sun began to creep through the blinds. Every time I thought I'd calmed down, her voice echoed in my head. "I'll do whatever I want, with whoever I want." By morning, I had made my decision. I couldn't let her walk all over me. Couldn't let her and Mark get away with what they'd done. They needed to understand the gravity of their choices. I grabbed my laptop and started gathering every piece of evidence I had. Text messages, the receipt from the envelope, even old photos of Stephanie and Mark together at events. It felt petty, but it also felt necessary. They had destroyed my life, and I wasn't going to let them waltz away without consequences. But as I stared at the evidence piling up on my screen, a part of me hesitated. Was this who I wanted to be? Someone consumed by anger, looking for revenge? I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that I couldn't sit around and do nothing. I decided to reach out to a lawyer. Not because I wanted revenge, at least that's what I told myself, but because I needed to protect myself. If this was going to end, I was going to make sure I walked away with some dignity. That afternoon, I called Stephanie. I kept my voice calm, though it took everything in me to do so. "We need to talk," I said. She hesitated. "I'll come by tonight." "Fine," I replied and hung up. The next confrontation was going to be different. I wasn't going to let her manipulate or dismiss me. This time I was taking control. By the time she walked through the door that evening, I had everything ready. The envelope sat on the kitchen table, along with a stack of printouts, the hotel receipt, phone records I'd pulled, and a couple of photos from her social media where Mark's shadow loomed a little too closely behind her. Stephanie walked in like nothing had happened, like she hadn't gutted me the night before. She dropped her purse on the counter and crossed her arms, her expression cold and unreadable. "What do you want?" she asked, as if this was some minor inconvenience in her schedule. I motioned to the table. "Sit down." She glanced at the papers, her brow furrowing, but she didn't move. "What is all this?" "This," I said, keeping my voice steady, "is everything you've been hiding from me. The lies, the late nights, the hotel with Mark. It's all here." For the first time, I saw her flinch. Her composure cracked for just a second, but she recovered quickly. "I don't have to explain myself to you," she said, her voice dripping with defiance. "You already did last night," I shot back. "You made it perfectly clear that you don't care about this marriage, about us. So here's what's going to happen." I slid a manila folder across the table toward her. Inside were the preliminary divorce papers my lawyer had drafted that afternoon. Her eyes widened as she opened it, her face finally betraying a hint of panic. "You're serious," she said, almost to herself. "Dead serious," I replied. "You've been lying to me for months. You've disrespected everything we built together. And now, I'm done." She laughed bitterly, shaking her head. "You think this is going to hurt me? You think I'll just crumble and beg you to forgive me? Newsflash, I don't need you. I haven't needed you in a long time." Her words stung, but they also solidified my resolve. I stood up, leaning over the table, so there was no mistaking the finality in my voice. "Good? Because you're not getting another second of my time, my trust, or my life. You can have Mark or whoever else you're sneaking around with, but don't think for a second that you're walking out of this without consequences." Her defiance faltered, just for a moment. "What does that mean?" "It means I've already started the process. The lawyer knows everything, and I have every piece of proof I need. If you try to fight me on this, it's going to get ugly for both of you." For the first time, she looked genuinely scared. Maybe it was the realization that she'd lost control of the situation, or maybe it was the reality of what she'd done finally sinking in. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," she said, her voice quieter now. I shook my head, my tone cold. "No, Stephanie. You did that the moment you decided to betray me. Now, get out." She stared at me for a long moment, her face a mixture of anger and something that almost looked like regret. But she didn't argue. She grabbed her purse and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The silence that followed was deafening, but for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. The house was quiet after she left, the kind of stillness that felt both liberating and suffocating. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at the divorce papers she'd left untouched. It wasn't just about ending the marriage. It was about reclaiming myself, the person I'd been before her lies turned my world upside down. But I wasn't done yet. Stephanie might have walked out of the house, but I wasn't going to let her and Mark walk away from this without understanding the weight of what they'd done. It wasn't about revenge, it was about justice, about holding them accountable for their betrayal. I took out my laptop and logged into social media. Over the years, Stephanie had built a carefully curated image of herself, a successful professional, a loving wife, the kind of person people admired. Mark, too, had his own persona, the loyal best friend everyone trusted. Together, they'd played their parts well. Not anymore. I drafted a single post. Short, factual, and to the point. I didn't name names, but I didn't need to. The receipt from the hotel was attached, along with the timestamp that matched the night she was supposedly working late. I kept the tone neutral, simply stating that I discovered the truth about my wife's affair and was ending the marriage. Before hitting post, I paused. This wasn't about humiliating them. I reminded myself it was about making sure the people around us saw them for who they truly were. I clicked post. The fallout was immediate. Within minutes, my phone started buzzing with messages. Friends, co-workers, even people I hadn't spoken to in years, all asking what had happened. Mark's name came up more than once, confirming what I already knew. People had noticed something off but hadn't said anything. By the next morning, Stephanie and Mark's perfect images were already beginning to crack. Mutual friends reached out, expressing their shock and disgust. Some defended her, of course, but most didn't. Mark's silence was deafening. It wasn't about revenge, I reminded myself again. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel satisfying to watch the truth finally come out. Later that day, I sent Stephanie a message. Short and direct. Your lawyer can contact mine from now on. We have nothing left to discuss. Her reply came hours later, a weak attempt at justifying her actions, but I didn't even open it. She didn't deserve another second of my time. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork, meetings with lawyers, and awkward conversations with friends and family. It was exhausting, emotionally and mentally, but every step forward felt like shedding a weight I didn't realize I'd been carrying. Stephanie tried to reach out a few times. First, it was angry texts about the social media post, accusing me of ruining her reputation. Then came the more subdued messages, half-hearted apologies, attempts to explain herself, and finally, a plea for one last talk. I ignored them all. She'd already said everything I needed to hear at that party. Mark predictably vanished. He deleted his social media accounts, and mutual friends told me he'd been avoiding everyone since the post went viral. Part of me felt satisfaction knowing he'd lost as much as I had, but mostly I just felt relief that I'd cut him out of my life for good. As the dust settled, I began to focus on myself. The house, once a constant reminder of her absence, started to feel like mine again. I rearranged the furniture, got rid of anything that reminded me of her, and started making it into a space that reflected who I was, not who we'd been. I also found myself reconnecting with old friends, people I'd drifted away from during my marriage. They'd seen the signs, they admitted, but hadn't wanted to interfere. I didn't hold it against them. If anything, I was grateful for their support now. One evening, while clearing out the last of her things, I came across an old photo of us. It was from the early days back when we were young and full of dreams. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness. Not for her, but for what we'd lost. For the man I'd been when I thought love could conquer anything. But that sadness didn't last. Because now, I saw it for what it was, a lesson. A harsh, painful, necessary lesson. I'm not the same person I was when this all began. I'm stronger, wiser, and more protective of my time and energy. The betrayal cut deep, but it didn't break me. If anything, it showed me who I could be when the people I trusted the most let me down. If anyone out there is going through something similar, here's what I've learned. Trust your instincts. Don't ignore the little signs. And most importantly, don't let someone else's betrayal define your worth. Stephanie and Mark may have taken something from me, but I'm taking back so much more. And as I move forward, I'm learning to leave the past where it belongs, behind me,